Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another session of managerial accounting. Today, we talk about, instruments of management accounting, part number 2. And in that regard, we especially discuss certain constraints. And in the aspect of having constraints, how to make appropriate decisions. So constraints could be like the scope, so the volume of a production, for example, the time issue. Naturally, a production machine only has the capability of 24/7, 24 hours, 7 days a week, for example, but also perhaps even budget constraints, cost constraints in this case, and we need to make decisions based on that. That'll be the main focus for today. Here are your learning objectives. When we talk about the different decisions regarding constraints, then on the one hand, we need to consider what are the relevant costs to not get overwhelmed with all sorts of different numbers or costs or positions in an income statement that are, in order to make a good decision, that are actually not relevant. Then the one-time only special orders, we'll have a look at that. Insourcing, outsourcing, that's in a sense like a make or buy decision. And also when we have a product mix and we design the optimal production program, we also calculate here our capacity constraints and how we make decisions based on that. As a side aspect of that, we'll also evaluate the lowest price, how to calculate the lowest prices for certain products in certain situations. Okay, they'll be mainly the task for today. Okay, here right away an example of relevant costs. We see on the left hand all the revenues and the costs and then different positions of the costs. And we have an alternative one, namely to just stay as we are. We don't reorganize business as usual, in a sense, with an operating income of 1.6 million. And we have also alternative 2, where the company thinks that we might reorganize ourselves and therefore cut labor. However, of course, we also have costs of reorganization. But in the end, we may have an increase in operating income, increase it by $70,000 in this case. So the question is actually also a cost-benefit factor. Does it make sense to reorganize? And in this case, how can we reorganize? Which positions are actually affected? And when we talk about management accounting and controlling, this is a very simple example, but we easily get overwhelmed with all the different positions of costs and assets and revenues and depreciation and whatnot. So there are so many positions that can be or that are part of an income statement that you easily overlook the actual necessary information. Sometimes even it's possible that we need information and we can't really gather different positions, or not yet, they're not calculated yet. So we may even be forced to make a decision based on limited information. So the important aspect is that that we have the relevant information necessary. And just like in this example, we focus actually on the costs of reorganization and of the labor costs, because obviously the labor is going to be affected. If we reorganize, we need less staff, and therefore those are the 2 positions that are most critical. As seen on the right-hand table, that we just need to evaluate actually those two. We can calculate based on those two how many work hours does that really mean. Does it make sense to reorganize and invest $90,000 in this case? And yes, obviously the difference is again $70,000. So obviously it does make sense, and we could make easily a decision based on relevant costs. This is a very simple example to show you what I mean with relevant costs. Another aspect are, for example, also historical costs, also sunk costs. If we have invested in something that is now, needless to say, without any value, there's no value left, there may not even be an asset per se left, then those costs that we invested, they're sunk costs. Even though, let's say we bought an old car, even though we still have the old car, but there is no value left, or we are not using that car anymore, and we can sell it because we won't get anything for it. So those costs are sunk. In that aspect, we don't need to calculate with those costs anymore. In a sense, we can need to write them off. All right. Then we are already at the one-time only special order decision. What does it mean, a one-time only special order? That would mean that we have companies who on a regular basis have their regular production and sell their production or their products accordingly. And then sometimes we have the opportunity that someone may call and give us a special order, like let's say 500 pieces of a certain product, but perhaps also at a special price. And now we have to make a decision. On the one hand, we have to make sure, can we handle such an additional order? Do we have the capacity on the one hand? And on the other hand, whether the question for the price, whether that even makes sense for us. Pretty basic decision rule for that is actually the cost benefit factor, whether it does make sense to invest because we will gain, and if it's only just €1 or $1 more than we had before, perhaps it would make sense. And in order to show you that example, I have an example. I have another calculation right here. Okay, so we have here Boffin LDT makes children's chemistry sets. Boffin has the capacity of 10,000 sets per year. And due to the falling demand towards the end of the year, they only expect to produce 9,000 sets this year. So this gets to show us that they have a capacity left of 1,000 chemistry sets. The normal retail price is $199. So we have the cost of data per set for the production at capacity is the prime cost, $80. Prime cost in this case would mean, let's see, so we can treat this prime cost sorry for that. We can treat that prime cost as a material cost, as a variable cost, so to speak. And then we have variable overhead costs as well. $20, $80 prime cost, $20 variable costs, and also fixed overhead costs of $15. Now, a large local school approaches Boffin and offers $110 per set for 500 sets. So that's exactly such a situation, a one-time only, in a sense, special order. They want to have 500 sets since we have towards the end of the year a lack in orders, so to speak, we have a capacity left of 1,000 chemistry sets. So it would be easy for us to take on that offer, and we have the capacity to produce another 500 sets. So the question is left whether we want to sell those for $110. And this would be in class now, this would be your question and your answer, or maybe also our discussion. And in this case, well, I'll just give you the gist of it. In a sense, we have prime costs as variable costs, $80, variable overhead costs as $20, are $100 that are, in a sense, that leads us to our contribution margin. We have $100, and $100 that we need to invest, in a sense. Yes, we still have fixed overhead costs also of $15, but despite the fact whether we sell those 500 additional sets or not, the fixed overhead costs, they are already fixed. We are going to pay them anyway. So needless to say, whether we have those 500 sets, whether we can sell them or not, we still have to pay per unit, per chemistry set, the $15 in fixed overhead costs. They are not going to be erased. So the only actual costs that are, in this case, variable, are $100. And if Boffin would take the offer of $110 per set, then at least we have here a contribution margin of $10. And since all the fixed costs are actually already covered, they need to be already covered, probably with the other 9,000 sets that we have already sold. Hopefully the break-even point is a bit lower. That would allow us a contribution margin of $10, or actually an operating income of $10 per set. Times 500 sets means that we actually could earn $5,000 that we didn't have before. So the only thing the only aspects that we take into account, actually the only relevant costs, are the variable costs. Because this is a one-time only special order. It would be a different story if this is a regular basis. Then we would have to make a deal, because we still have to cover all of our fixed costs on a regular basis every single year. And we don't want to ruin our price, our reputation based on the price. We would probably have to make a different deal. But now at the end of the year, we have the capacity. We could earn $10 times 500. So yes, Boffin should accept that offer based on the calculation of only the variable costs. What other factors may influence the decision, as a question number 2? That would be the image. Is it wise for that company to sell 500 sets at $110? They may come in a couple of years back and want to have those sets again for $110, or maybe they even spread the word. If you buy more sets, then you can get it really cheap, instead of $199 for $110. So maybe here is also room for negotiation. How about $150? How about $130? So this naturally leaves a bit wide open in what direction should we go and which decision should we make. But on an accounting perspective, with an accounting attitude, we definitely, at least, we know we can take the order, because we gain at least the $10 per set, and earn finally $5,000 more than we had before. And that's, in a sense, the gist of it. Then we go to make or buy decision. And as already mentioned, make or buy is a question. Should we insource it and we make it, or should we outsource it? Which one is cheaper? This is again a cost and benefit question. Which option, and that we will have to calculate which option actually has the lowest cost, and also brings us or generates the highest profit. And that's what it's all about in that. Okay, so this is our calculation. And this is already a big part of management accounting, of cost management. How do we calculate our costs to make the best decision, so to speak? And here we have yet another exercise with a rather simple example. The Cesare Computers makes 5,200 units of a circuit board ZB76. That's like a laptop, something like a notebook, at a cost of $280 each. Variable costs per unit is $190, and fixed costs per unit is $90. Peach Electronics offers to supply 5,200 units, also of the same circuit board, for $260. Now, if the Cesare buys from Peach, it will be able to save $10 per unit in fixed costs to continue to incur the remaining $80 per unit. Okay, so the question is, should the Cesare accept Peach's offer? And naturally, we need to explain why or how. This is now a bit of a challenging question. We have variable costs of $190 and fixed costs per unit of $90. However, if we purchase Peach Electronics, then we could save $10 of the fixed costs, which means there would be a $10 saving, so to speak. The other fixed costs of $80 remain, which means whether we build those computer boards or whether we buy those computer boards, $80 of fixed costs remain. In that aspect of the decision of making or buying, again, we would not take those fixed costs into account because we would have to pay them anyway. In that sense, they are not relevant costs. However, we did save those $10. And in addition, if we buy from Peach Electronics, we would also save the variable costs of $190. So we would save $190 and $10 in fixed costs, so to speak. We would save $200 if we purchase the circuit boards from Peach Electronics and pay $260. Now that I have explained it that way, hopefully the decision or your decision becomes obvious. Saving $200 does not justify spending $260. So Peach's Electronics, the circuit board, would need to cost, let's say, $190. Or let's say it could break even at $200. Then it wouldn't matter whether we make it or whether we purchase it. But at the price of $260, it actually doesn't make sense to us. So it would still be cheaper if we would make it in that sense. Why? Because we are not treating the fixed costs. Because at least the $80 of the fixed costs we have them anyway, and therefore are going to stay irrelevant costs. Okay, hopefully I was able to clarify that well enough for you. And then we have here another example, and that is also like a break-even analysis with the same idea, like are we going to make it or are we going to buy it? So insource it or outsource it. And as we have seen with the with the earlier exercise, this always also has to do with a break-even point. Like the $200 would be, for example, a break-even point if Peaches Electronics would also sell those parts at $200. Now, in this case, we are selling, or we are interested in patient information sheets. That is the MedOrbis Limited Liability Corporation noticed that costs for the patient information sheets are very high, and they're looking for alternatives. Now, patient information sheets, those are when you buy a medicine like pills, headache pills, for example, then you not only get the pills, but you also get like a patient information sheet where there is printed on it like how you use or take the pills and also the side effects and so on. And the MedOrbis Limited Liability Corporation needs to print also patient information sheets for their medicine, and now they're looking into alternatives, and they want to calculate actually whether to insource it or whether to outsource it. And here we have alternative one is to insource the print of the patient information sheets. This would add up to monthly costs of 30,000 euros. That's a depreciation, payroll, for example. Then the fitting the printing set would evoke a one-time cost of €2,500. Additionally, the print of every patient information sheet would cost 0.0 euro, so 3 cents. The pages to be printed are bought for 2 cents each. And each week, a limited amount of 70,000 patient information sheets can be printed. So we know, based on alternative one, that we have monthly costs of 30,000 euros, depreciation, payroll, that even though it's not written here, but those are fixed costs. Depreciation based on the machine that we bought for printing, the printing machine, that's a fixed cost. We have a fixed depreciation, as well as the payroll. Those people who work in the printing department, if you want to say it that way, those are probably fixed too. At least that's the information we get here. That's $30,000 a month. Then we have a one-time only cost of $2,500. That's a one-time only, and it's due to fitting the print set. So it's directly related to getting started with the prints. So to insource it, to make the prints ourselves. Therefore, we can treat that part like a commission as a variable cost. Because if we choose to not print those $2,500 are also they also are not here. So since if we choose to print in-house, then those $2,500 are in a sense variable costs. And then we have the 3 cents per information sheet, the paper, and 2 cents for the print. So altogether 5 cents actually per patient information sheet in addition. Now, alternative 2 is to outsource the print of patient information sheets for a flat charge of 3,500 euros, but for the first 30,000 patient information sheets. Okay. Thereafter, every patient information sheet will generate costs of 7 cents, each including all material and printing costs. Now, each week, a limited amount of 80,000 patient information sheets can be printed. So the question is make or buy. Answer the questions by calculating the costs of each alternative, and then based on that, make a decision. So in alternative 2, we clearly see that we have one flat charge, and that's 3,500 euros for the first 30,000 patient information sheets, which means at this point, we would actually have to calculate which one is cheaper. Is it cheaper to invest in alternative 1, $2,500, and how many thousands of patient information sheets can I print and still stay cheaper than the $3,500 flat charge of alternative 2? Or we could also say, at what point do we break even? At what point, how many patient information sheets do we have to print to break even, so that it's actually the same price as alternative 2, where it doesn't matter? And then we would also know that any print less in insourcing is cheaper, and any print higher than a certain amount, but still below 30,000 patient information sheets, alternative 2 would be cheaper. So that's at this point we could calculate here a break-even point, or a first break-even point. Those would be, in a sense, two functions. We equal two functions. Function number 1 would be $2,500 plus 5 cents each, so X, because we don't know yet how many, and that should equal the 3,500 euros. And we know the limit is 30,000 patient information sheets. But thereafter, once we would calculate such a break-even point, thereafter we still have another function yet, because if we need more than 30,000 patient information sheets, let's say 50,000. Now, then again, that's the question, because we are still capable to do that to insource that. But if we outsource it, then the function has changed, the cost function, because it's not only a $3,500 euros anymore, but plus 7 cents times X, depending on how many more we print. That would be a new cost function. So actually, we could yet make another break-even point where we can filter or realize or calculate which alternative is cheaper yet. And on the next slides, we are going to evaluate that based on our calculation. Hope so far you were able to follow me. All right. So here we have, in a sense, exactly what we've been talking about. On the one hand, 2,500 euros and the altogether 5 cents, and the flat charge on the other hand of 3,500 euros. And for every print after 30,000 patient information sheets, we have costs of another 7 cents. So those are, as I already mentioned, in a sense, also two or three different cost functions, namely, on the one hand, this cost function, 2,500 plus 5 cents times X, we don't know yet how many, equals the 3,500 as a cost function. And we have another Here we have the same cost function. That does not change. We only know that we can at the most produce or print 70,000 in patient information sheets, equals the other function, the outsourcing opportunity, 3,500 plus 7 cents. And now also, of course, times X, because we don't know how many patient sheets we have to print yet. And we must include that minus the 30,000 patient information sheets that actually, belongs to function, to the cost function, to the first cost function of alternative. So X must be higher than 30,000, namely at least 30,001. And therefore the function is written like that, plus 7 cents times X minus 30,000. I also, in this case, hope this is understandable. All right. And then this is okay for you. When you calculate that, you can follow those numbers, but I will get to that in just a minute. Here we have the cost functions, and we calculated those. 2,500 plus 5 cents times X equals 3,500. This calculation gives us an X, so a patient information sheets of 20,000 patient information sheets. Now, what does that mean? That would mean that at precisely 20,000 patient information sheets, it's a break even. So it actually doesn't matter whether we insource or whether we outsource. It's a break even, literally. The cost functions are equal. But that would also mean that at 19,999 patient information sheets, insourcing is cheaper. And it also means that at 20,001 patient information sheets, outsourcing is cheaper. So actually here, right on the right side, this is wrong. Here is written 1 to 20,000 patient information sheets is insourcing, but that's actually incorrect, because the 20,000 is literally a break-even point. At 20,000, it doesn't really matter whether to insource or outsource. So the actual number that should be written here should be 19,999. The outsourcing part, and that would be correct, it's 20,001. But until when, and we have not calculated that part yet. However, we need to do that by using our second cost function for outsourcing. Okay, and to describe the second function, I'm going to switch the screen and go to the solutions, because I believe those might be better at this point. All right, here we are. Right. So this was the calculation we just calculated, and this is our second alternative, so to speak, or our second cost function. We equal again the first the original cost function for insourcing, 2,500 plus 5 cents times X, and it equals, in this case, 3,500 plus 7 cents times X. But as mentioned, we need to at least make sure that we have more than 30,000. So minus 2,100, and the 2,100 are constituted by calculating the 30,000 patient information sheets times the 7 cents, which means we know those costs thereafter, after this flat charge, they cost 7 cents, and they must be more than 30,000. So 30,000 patient information sheets times 7 cents equals 2,100 euros. So whatever X is, it must be at least more than 2,100 euros. It must be at least 2,107 cents in this case. Okay, I hope you can gather that, comprehend that step. When you have this cost function, well, then it's easy to go because you just need to calculate, and then we have 2,500. The original cost function equals 1,400 plus 7 cent times x. X equals at last 55,000. And now I'm going to go back to our original screen, to the slides. That's where we are. This is how the 1,400 plus 7 cents come into play. And at last we have an X that equals 55,000 patient information sheets. Now, here's the question once more. What does that mean? That again literally means that we have yet another break-even point, namely with another function. We could also say, as I have mentioned in the previous session, that those are jump fixed costs, so to speak, because after 30,000 patient information sheets, the costs just jump. So those are jump fixed costs, and due to that jump, we suddenly create another break-even point. So while we still talk about patient information sheets, due to the amount of printed sheets, we actually in this case have two different break-even points based on jump fixed costs. Now, and in this sense, we have the 55,000 as a break-even point, which means it doesn't matter whether we insource or outsource if we print 55,000 patient information sheets. However, if we print one less, then outsourcing is cheaper. We have already calculated that based on the previous cost function or equalization. 20,001 until 50, well, that's actually incorrect too, until 54,999, it is cheaper to outsource it. 55,000 again is a break-even point. It doesn't really matter. And from 55,001 patient information sheet till 70,000, insourcing is cheaper again. Why until 70,000? Because we can't, or our machine can't handle more per week. So there we have a constraint and a limitation. So we are limited with 70,000 patient information sheets. Therefore, obviously, thereafter, 70,001 until 80,000, we have to outsource, not because it's cheaper, but because we can't handle that. Right. Okay, hopefully that was a reasonable example, and hopefully you could follow the calculations or the step. And again, I did post in KUS the solutions, so hopefully you are good to go with that. Next slide, we go to the product mix decision with a constraint, which means we have a product mix. We are not only talking about one product, let's say patient information sheets, but we are talking about more product, maybe even several products, and maybe they all use the same machine, and so therefore automatically we have a constraint. And also here, based on that constraint, we have a decision rule to choose the product that produces the highest contribution margin per unit of the constraining resource, which means not just to choose that product, but it's a matter of a sequence. Which one do we produce the most of, or which ones do we produce first, and which ones last? Why is that important with a product mix? Because the constraint is automatically based on time or based on possible volume that the machine can handle. Now, if we are constrained, if we are limited, then I rather prefer to produce a product with a higher contribution margin, gives us more opportunity than the other way around. Okay, and also for this, I have a very brief example right now. We have two products, for example. A selling price of product A, $10, product B, $30. And then we have variable costs per unit, $6 for product A, $15 for product B, which means that we have a contribution margin, and we would call that an absolute contribution margin per unit of $4 for product A and of $15 for product B. So based on the contribution margin, or on the absolute contribution margin, we would have a clear decision. It would be very easy for us to make a decision if we have capacity constraints on our production machine, that obviously we are going to produce sooner or even more of product B with a higher contribution margin than of product A. However, we can also calculate our contribution margin percentage, 40%, and in this case, 50%. This already shows us that the contribution margin based on the percentage is not that far off. It seems like the $4 are much less than the $15. However, given on the percentage of it, it's already a bit more of a relation, which means it's also questionable how much do we sell in the end. If we can sell more of the $10 product, we still have a very good contribution margin percentage. It may in the end actually work out that we sell even more because there is not that much difference based on the percentage. There is already one relation to the product, so to speak. In addition, and that is a very important part for a product mix decision, we also have, or in this case, we have machine hours required per unit. So a product A needs half a minute, I suppose, or hour, a half an hour, right, machine hours. Product A needs a half an hour to be produced on that machine. Product B, however, needs 3 hours production time on that machine. So this is an important information because let's just calculate. While we produce product B within the 3 hours, we could actually produce 6 times as much of product A. If we produce 6 times as much, then we would have an absolute contribution margin of 6 times 4 of $24. So in the same 3 hours of production time, we would be able to achieve a contribution margin of $24 for product A, while we still have $15 for product B. And that is precisely what we need to calculate, and we call that a relative contribution margin. We put the absolute contribution margin of product A, $4, of product B, $15, in relation to, in this case, the machine hours. So in relation to the half an hour and to the 3. And when we calculate that, then we have for product A $4 contribution margin divided by 0.5 hours gives us an $8 contribution margin per hour. When we calculate product B, contribution margin $15 divided by 3 hours gives us a relative contribution margin of $5. And this clarifies it now pretty much that we have a much higher contribution margin for product A, a much higher relative contribution margin than for product B. So in order for us to choose which product should we first put into production or into the sequence, or which product should we try to produce most of within capacity constraints, then we need to actually choose product A with the higher relative contribution margin, because in relation to the machine hours, I can make much more of product A and therefore gain a higher contribution margin, namely in this case of $24 in comparison to product B and to the $15 absolute contribution margin. Again, I hope I explained it reasonably enough, but we will have yet another example where we can have a deeper look at it. Okay, and here I like to show you the example of the wedding cake bakery. We have 3 products. That bakery designs and bakes wedding cakes. And here we have 3 cakes that they focus on, 3 products, namely the classic wedding cake, the wedding cake deluxe, and the wedding cake princess dream. Then we also know the production, that's the max production possible per product. 52 cakes for the classic wedding cake, 20 for the deluxe, and 60 for the princess dream. And we also have the production time in minutes, which means we have 80 minutes per classic wedding cake, 75 minutes for the deluxe, and 50 minutes for the princess dream. Then we also know variable costs, and we also know our selling price, our net selling price in this case. And then we have an assignment, so to speak, an additional order, which gives us a bottleneck situation. So we have a constrained resources in this case. And we need to calculate those also. We have a max production hour of 150 hours. That's the oven time. Then the additional order are 30 hard cakes. Variable costs are 180 euros in this case, and production time will be 55 minutes per unit. But one question is how much capacity is left, and that would mean that we need to calculate for our capacity, we need to calculate the minutes times the max production per cake, 80 times 52, 75 minutes times 20, 50 minutes times 60, in order to get the capacity, how many minutes are actually already used up. We have a production oven time of 150 hours. 150 hours, everything else is written actually in minutes, so we would have to break that down into minutes. 150 hours equals times 60, 6,000, 9,000, 90,000 minutes. So we have 90,000 minutes, no, 9,000, pardon me. We have 9,000 minutes left. That's the max production time in the oven. And then the question is, how many minutes are those? And we need to subtract that. Maybe the capacity is already maxed. Maybe not. For that, I'll switch the screen again, and then I will go to the solutions once more. Here we have the solutions. We have the net price, and the variable costs were on the other slide. Okay, maybe that is a bit difficult now to follow. However, we were just about to calculate the times, and right here below we have the times already calculated for you. So the 150 hours equal 9,000 minutes, we got that. And the capacity used, which means that the wedding cake, the deluxe, and the princess dream, the capacity altogether, they use 8,660 minutes, which means they're actually not at full capacity. This means also that we have here another 340 minutes left. That means that we could take an additional order. And the question is whether we are able to take this particular heart cake additional order. And we also already calculated that the heart cake capacity, it's 30 cakes at 55 minutes. So we would need at least 1,650 minutes. However, we only have 340 minutes left. And that means that we have, that we need a capacity actually for the new order, an additional capacity of 1,310 minutes. Now, and that is now the question. I'm going back to our original slide. We have, in a sense, how much capacity is left? Only 350 minutes are left, but we need 1,650. So where do we take the 1,310 minutes from in order to be able to do that additional order? Let's say I'm a baker and the 3 cakes are my basic production. However, we supply wedding cakes, and that additional order, maybe that's a big shot wedding, and of course we want to have an image boost also, and we want to bake, we want to take on the order, we want to bake the 30 heart cakes for that particular wedding. So we need to calculate how can we do that? We know that we don't have enough time, which means we know that 1,310 minutes are missing. We need to actually, we need to skip one of the production cakes, namely by at least 1,310 minutes, in order for us to be able to produce the 30 heart cakes. So we need to reduce one of those cakes, which means we would need to calculate which one has the cheapest contribution margin, or the least contribution margin. And again, actually, which one has the least contribution margin in relation to the production, to the oven time, in relation to the minutes of production. So always when we have a mixed product situation, we need to choose the optimal production program. We need to calculate our relative contribution margin. And in this case, we have here our variable costs, 280, 350, and 210 euros. And we have our selling price, which means we can quickly calculate our contribution margin, selling price minus variable costs. 600 minus 280 is 320, and so on. I'm going back to our solutions. here we are, contribution $320 euros. For the deluxe, we have a contribution margin of 450 euros. And for the Princess Green, we have a contribution margin of 440 euros. Now, don't be quite yet mistaken. This is still yet the absolute contribution margin. Net price minus variable costs give us the absolute contribution margin. And based on the absolute contribution margin, the deluxe has the highest contribution margin. We should definitely produce that. The Princess Dream has the second highest contribution margin. And the classic wedding cake has the least contribution margin. And therefore, if we want to substitute a cake for the additional order, if we want to remove or make space for oven time, we should remove the classic wedding cake with the least contribution margin. However, this is only the absolute contribution margin. We still need to put it in relation to the machine hours, to the oven time in this case. So we calculate our relative contribution margin per minute, which means we take the absolute contribution margin of $320 euros divided by the minutes, and the classic wedding cake takes 80 minutes. Divided by 80 is 4 euros. The deluxe wedding cake is 450 in contribution margin, divided by 75 minutes per cake is 6 euros. And here we have 440 contribution margin divided by 50 minutes is 8.80 euros. And you see, in relation to the machine hours, the sequence, the production program, the sequence, the order has changed. Suddenly, the Princess Dream has the biggest or the highest relative contribution margin. Then the deluxe wedding cake, and still the weakest, in this case, relative contribution margin is provided by the classic wedding cake. So now we know for sure that we can substitute the classic wedding cake, in this case, remove that in order to produce the hard cakes. And now, in order to produce the hard cakes, we need to calculate. Let's go again back to our original slide. We need to again calculate how many cakes do we have to remove. Why? Because 80 times 52, let me see, I don't have that now calculated right off. One moment, 80 times 52, 4,160 minutes. The classic wedding cake takes up 4,160 minutes. However, for that 30 hard cake production, we only need an additional 1,310 minutes. So we don't have to skip the whole production of the classic wedding cake. We only need to skip, so to speak, a certain percentage or a certain part of the production. And that means that we can calculate, or we need to calculate, how many are we going to remove or skip. So I go back to the solutions. We need 1,310 minutes. And we need to take those 1,310 minutes off the classic wedding cake, which means we can calculate 1,310 minutes divided by the 80 minutes of each classic wedding cake, and that equals 16.375 cakes. So we only need to remove 16.375 cakes in order to free up the necessary 1,310 minutes. However, we cannot just skip 16.375 cakes. So in these in that regard, we always have to round up. Never round down, so because it's more than 16 cakes. So we need 17 cakes, which means a few more minutes are probably going to be left. But 17 cakes we need to remove from producing, and instead we can produce 30 hard cakes for that particular additional order. And now our last question would be, it only makes sense for us to agree to that additional order, which we have to even remove our part of our production, our original production. It only makes sense for us if the price makes up for us removing the original or adjusting the original production problem, which means we have to get at least the contribution margin of those 17 wedding cakes. We have to get that at least back, and we have to assure that all the variable costs of the hard cake are also covered, obviously. We see here in our original slide that we have variable costs of $180. And in this case, we also see in the solutions that we take the $180, those are our variable costs, plus now we need to calculate our lost contribution margin, namely the contribution margin of those 17 wedding cakes that we missed out, or that we are going to miss out if we take that additional order. So 17 times, and now be careful to be sure to use the absolute contribution margin, because this is still the actual contribution margin. The $4 are only in relation to the machine hours. So the $4 are, or euros, the €4 are depending on the production. It's to calculate the constraints of production. But the actual contribution margin, the actual costs that we need to add here is obviously the absolute contribution margin. So 17 times the absolute contribution margin of the wedding cake, 320. And then this would be 17 times 320, so 17 cakes. However, we need to calculate that for each one of the 30 hard cakes. And therefore, we divide that again, divided by 30. So we get the costs that need to be added per each individual hard cake. We have on the one hand $180 in variable costs, and on the other hand, it looks like another $181.33 per each of the 30 hard cakes. That in a sense makes up for the lost contribution margin of the 17 wedding cakes. So we need to sell, and this is now also our lowest price that we need to at least sell the cake for, in order to not lose any profit or lose any contribution margin, but rather be able to take on an additional order, satisfy customers, and still gain the revenue or the contribution margin that we would have gained in the original case as well. So we charge a minimum per cake of $361.33. That contribution margin that we calculate here, so the missing contribution margin, that is what we call opportunity costs, because I have the opportunity to skip the 17 of the wedding cakes and take on the additional order of the hard cakes, or I have the opportunity to say no and continue to bake the 17 classic wedding cakes. Or I have another opportunity of baking something completely different. So that is called if we skip those 17 classic wedding cakes, then we have opportunity costs, namely of precisely the missed contribution margin of that particular product, let's say. That is another interesting or a very important aspect that is also very relevant that you should know. Okay, I hope also that you understood the process of calculating that, and hope you practice enough at home. Again, you will get calculations. I think 10 or 7 different calculations for your homework, voluntary homework in this case, and hopefully you get enough practice with all of that. Here we have another slide for the opportunity costs. So in a sense, opportunity costs are the missing contribution missing contribution margin of the products that I am not producing due to a one-time special order or due to a constraint, in this case an additional order. So it's the missing contribution margin, not to be confused with the missing profit. That's not true. Contribution margin does not equal the profit, but the opportunity costs are based on that contribution margin. Okay, now then we'll get, we have one more slide, so to speak, for behavioral implications. And this is in that sense also a slide that leads us already to towards our next session, towards, for example, a balanced scorecard, or also in the wines, the session last time, the session of management control systems, since those target a behavioral aspect, because all the calculations we have also done today are about, in order to make a good decision, in order to be able to make the best decision at a given time due to calculations, and so we are able to also choose the best alternative for an organization. And however, managers, based on their self-interest or self-serving behavior, do not automatically always choose the best option. We may calculate the best option, but that does not always mean that the calculations are taken into account, so to speak. So again, here, when we have management accountants as a business partner standing outside, we can probably advise or give better advice than if we are just, in a sense, controllers who come up with cost management calculations. However, managers may sometimes still choose another way, again, for their own interest. Maybe they like one product more than another product, or maybe they gain a bigger bonus of another product, and therefore they choose to produce that, despite the fact that it's actually a bit more inefficient, and that we could actually make more money off if we produce more of other products. Whatever the case, we need to take that into account. We need to think or keep that in consideration. Well, and again, I already mentioned the homework. It's voluntarily. I'll post it in KUS, and it regards a CVP analysis, decision making, safety, margin of safety, sensitivity analysis, and also product mix constraints, as we did today. The actual due date would be on Monday, the 27th of April. Again, it's voluntarily, but for those who like to turn it in, be free. And since it's not a group work anymore, but it's an individual work, I try to correct as much as I can. And I try to give you a feedback as much as I can. However, you do have all the solutions regarding the homework calculations. I will give you the solutions to the calculations as well past the 27th of April. So you can go ahead and work on it, try the best. You can also turn it in, submit it. But afterwards, I will provide you with the solutions so you can double check also for yourself. All right. And the last, that was my part for today. That was it. Next session will be a performance measurement, and the balanced scorecard is also interesting, and again online. All right, then have a good one, and I hope you enjoyed the class, so to speak, and I hope it all made sense to you. Okay, bye bye.